Hey everybody, I thought it would be cute if I started my video with me posing with the idea that we're talking about in this lecture. Unfortunately, I did it about 10 seconds after I wrote with a Sharpie on this note card and I'm feeling real weird. So, it's going to be a fun lecture. We're talking about social contracts. We're talking about the second ethical lens that you can include in speech 3. And by the way, you are required to include one of the ones we talk about as we're going through all these options to make people realize that the choice you're asking them to make to solve a problem is the right thing. It is the moral thing, it is the ethical thing that they should do because they have a moral obligation to be good. And that's gonna bring us into a lens that probably has a lot of relevance right now in our own ethical conundrums in this pandemic. So even if you're not the self-motivated kind of person who wants to learn about this stuff for your speech, fasten your seatbelts for something that affects your everyday life right now, and that is the ethical quandary of social contracts. Now, normally when I do this in class, I start out with a scenario where you imagine that somebody in the class has plagiarized, but I kind of offer them a deal. Like I do this whole thing where I have a Confederate and I like hold them up in front of the class and I'm like, this person plagiarized. Also, this person plagiarized. One of them plagiarized. We have to figure out who and we have to let them make a deal amongst them. It's the prisoner's dilemma. I act out prisoner's dilemma in front of the class and see if I can get people to kind of tell on each other or see if everybody keeps quiet and maintains the interest of other people above themselves. And it's fun, but we can't do it. And I thought about trying to stage it with my cats, but you can't keep cats in the same place and accuse them of plagiarism and expect them to play along. So that's just not going to happen. Anyway, this is the deal. Here's the basic premise of the Rachel's chapter on social contracts. Your interests are always affected by the interest of others. You're never alone. You never live in the vacuum that you may feel like you live in right now because you are kind of alone. But keep in mind that you are quarantined right now because of the interest of others. Your interests are always affected by the interest of others. And because of that, if everybody only looks out for themselves, we all end up worse off. That's the premise of social contract theory, and I'll leave it up to you whether or not you think it's true. Although, if you are following quarantine restrictions right now, you probably do. So let's assume that that's a universally accessible idea, at least for now, and then move on to talk about the theorizing that gets us to that idea and to the notion of the social contract. So, by the way, for speech 3 purposes, here's why you might want to use the social contract theory. It's useful if your problem that you're trying to solve involves people getting along in society. Yeah, because this is an ethical lens about people relating to people. If you're talking about governments, if you're talking about administrating authorities needing to do the right thing, that's an issue of social contracts. Even if you're talking about citizens needing to stand up and hold their leaders accountable, that's an issue of a social contract. So those are the situations where this is going to be the most useful ethical lens for you. So here's the deal with this is so much fun. The social contract. The social contract is based in the notion that we need morality strictly because we live in society. That's it. The only reason we need morality is the fact that we are constantly surrounded by all of these frickin' other people. And if we don't figure out a way to relate to them well, then we will lose the safety and all the other perks that we get from being in a group. So, morality is about group relations, basically, in social contract theory. Now, that means you have to figure out how your actions affect others. That means you have to be really alter-centric as you're thinking about ethics. So I know I talked a little about social contracts in the video about defining what a civic relationship to other people is. And there I cited Rousseau. And Rousseau's cool, but there's another social contract theorist that Rachel's talks about who is interesting because he's a little more volatile about where social contracts come from. This dude's name, and he's British, is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, who, by the way, is who Hobbes in Calvin and Hobbes the comic is named after. Cultural reference for today. Thomas Hobbes is writing in the 1600s. He's actually writing well before Rousseau. Although he didn't come up with as sophisticated of a notion as the general will and the government needing to be accountable to the general will, he does a really good idea of pointing out what brings about the need for a social contract. So Hobbes's notion is that we're all selfish jerks. That's what he thinks. That's what he thinks of the human race. Now, if you ever look into the biography of Thomas Hobbes, he had a real hard childhood. Sometimes Freud is right, and that means he walked out into the world with a really dismal view of what people can do to each other. And from that perspective, he decided again that we're all selfish jerks, and if we were left to our own devices, if we were left by ourselves, if nobody policed us, basically, then we would be selfish jerks and we would do despicable things to one another, and society would collapse. This is what he calls a state of nature. He thinks that's human beings' natural state, human beings' natural predisposition without some kind of government, some kind of authority to tell us what to do, is that we all look out for ourselves and we do not care what happens to the rest of society. And he thinks that in humanity's wild, natural state, then we can't really hope to function. We can't really hope to work together and be safe and be productive of the things that we need to survive because of four factors, four things in humans' natural state that prevent us from actually being a society and functioning and doing things together. The first factor is humans have equal needs, relatively. Yeah, understandably, you might say that an adult needs more food than an infant, but the infant's food comes from the adult's stash. Yeah, so it all kind of feeds into each other. So his first assumption is that in their natural state, humans all have equal basic needs. The problem, and this is why we can't all function together, is we cannot all get equal resources because there's not enough resources to go around. And if you think that's true in the 1600s, think about it now. Yeah, we are swarming the earth and we're using up resources in a way that a lot of people are not able to get what they need. Yeah, this is a real thing. This really happens. The third condition of all of this is that if we all need the same amount of stuff and there's not enough stuff to go around, we get into fights because we have equal power. And you need to think of that in a more primordial state than you probably are. You need to think about it in terms of fighting for toilet paper at the grocery right now. Because while it may seem to you that, well, no, society is built on an unequal distribution of power, that's after the state of nature. Yeah, that's what we create. But really, if all of us were hungry and a wild pig ran by, whoever got there first wouldn't be getting there first to kill it and eat it because they were somehow better or had advantages. They just ran. Like the rest of the people looking at the pig ran, and they just happened to catch it. Yeah? So if we have equal needs, we have scarcity, and we have equal power, we wind up with a state of limited altruism. Because we know that other people also need the things, and we know that other people have equal capacity to get the things, and we know that not everybody can get the things, and so we stop caring if the other people eat. We stop caring if the other people live or die. We become Hobbes's selfish jerks because we have to, basically, if we want to live. That's his stance on humanity. Anyway, and yeah, that sounds a little extreme. But again, think about how things are going right now. There's limited toilet paper. I'm going to go to the grocery store. I'm going to get it. And if I see some little old lady who's also reaching for the same thing of toilet paper, Am I going to say, wow, that's a little old lady, I should maintain 6 feet of distance? Or am I going to be like, look, that is my fucking toilet paper and I'm going to grab it because I can? Yeah, this is the kind of scenario we're looking at here. So, the state of nature, then, according to Hobbes, means that in order to survive together and get all the benefits that living together gets us, then two things need to happen in order for us to be a better, more productive society. First, humans need guarantees that they will not hurt each other. Because if left alone, humans will hurt each other. They will hurt each other for their own sake. And that's not stable. That's not a way to build a society, is it? So there has to be some kind of institution in place that prevents us from hurting each other. And second, there needs to be enforcement of agreements. So if I say, I am going to let you have the toilet paper, in the state of nature, I could do that and then just be like, psych, haha, my toilet paper, and I take it and I run because it's mine and nobody cares. Hobbes thinks we need some kind of enforcement to prevent that from happening. So again, you have to have guarantees that people will not hurt each other, and you need to have enforcement of agreements. That means we need a government. That means we need administration of some kind. That means we need our good friend, the social contract, that prevents us from doing whatever we want and hurting other people by doing so. The contract, basically, is the notion that we all agree that we are going to give up some of that unlimited freedom that we had in the state of nature to a government that will prevent us from being jerks. So, whereas I normally would be able to steal the toilet paper and run away, ha ha ha, I am willing to say, okay, government, I am willing to let you slap me on the wrist for stealing the toilet paper from the little old lady as long as you prevent other people from stealing my toilet paper. Yeah, that's the kind of guarantee that we get in the social contract. It's an understated kind of mental agreement from everybody in society. So there you have it. Social contracts prevent us from being selfish dicks. And it's all theoretical, but it's all very practical, isn't it? Because we are dicks to each other, and we have to figure out what to do about that. Now, social contract theory is not perfect. Like what we talked about before, there's always a hang-up. There's always a problem, potentially, with it. Now, the issues with social contracts include the fact that rules-based morality is really hard to enforce because rules always have exceptions. Yeah, and you hear that all the time, don't you? Even in political situations, even in a huge government like the United States. That's why the Constitution can be amended, because rules can have different consequences over time and they may need to be changed. So rules-based systems can be an issue. You can also have abusive governments, can't you? So let's say you're living in a society and you're like, okay, I'm going to give up some of my freedom to, in exchange, get a government that will tell other people not to steal my sheep out of the pasture. And that will be great. And I will go home and I will enjoy my wool. And then all of a sudden you realize the government is like setting shit on fire around you. The government is oppressing groups of people. The government is taking more of your freedom than you were willing to give up in order to have the social contract's protections. That can be an issue with this as well. That's actually why Rousseau, like 100 years after Hobbes, comes up with the notion of the general will, so the government has to be accountable to the people for whatever it does, and it can't become as abusive. That's also why we have the institution of civil disobedience, because the premise of civil disobedience is the government has broken the social contract. They're no longer protecting me, and because of that, I don't have to follow the laws the government created. That's a stopgap in the issue of abusive governments in social contracts. Also keep in mind, some people are left out of social contracts because ultimately a social contract is based on consent, and not everybody can give consent. Animals, For example, are living in our society. And I know this because I've been in so many Zoom conversations this week where people pop their cats or their dogs up on their desk and they're like, ah, look at my cats. All those animals are in quarantine with us, right? They're all affected by government regulations. They have no idea what's going on. They couldn't consent to it. Same deal with infants. Same deal with the mentally handicapped. None of these entities can consent. And that becomes an issue if a social contract is really based on consent. Now, these things may be fixable, but keep in mind that those are hangups. Now, think about social contracts. Think about social contracts in light of various governmental things that are going on right now. But more importantly for your speech, think about social contracts in terms of your problem that you're trying to solve and figure out if creating or breaking some kind of social contract will in fact fix it. And if that's true, then this is the theoretical lens for you. And there you have it. These are the two lenses you need to think about for this week. You had subjectivism, you had social contracts. You're going to have a little bit more to think about next week before you actually start to producing this speech. But keep in mind in the meantime that you should think about these things in your everyday life as well, because again, morality is about other people and you have to navigate other people all the time. So think about it real hard, and I will see you next week with more things to bust open your brain. In the meantime, goodbye.